Hey, welcome to the project I've been working on for 4 years, and the sole reason I continue learning game development. To put it simply, this project encompasses most of what I know. It's my portfolio, and ironically the game I've wanted to exist since, well, Gen 4. Around that time I started getting burnt out on turn-based games, at which point I had played 2 generations of mainline games, along with a few non-mainline games like Coliseum and Mystery Dungeon, and really wanted a Pokemon game that played like the anime. Now, before getting into the overview and the critiques of the project, I want to share a bit about what else I've been working on during these past 4 years, so if you want to skip this part, the timestamps will be in the description. So I started this project in my junior year of university. Since then, I've graduated with a bachelor's in computer science, started my master's in computer science, organized 2 game jams for the Twitch streamer Moon, which by the time this video comes out, I would have organized the 3rd, and made Tetris twice. Once in Java with OpenGL and another time in C++ with Vulkan for Android with custom hand gestures. I also made a game for the second Moon Jam as seen here, with Moon playing it here.
The description is, I tried to make a very scary game to get back at you for pushing back the game jam. Oh, the game jam judging back. Yes. So this is apparently payback.
Where are you going, darling?
Ah! Ah! Oh, Maze Sense activate. Behold, Twitch. Okay, dude. Yes. So this is apparently payback.
And a game that's currently on my itch. For the itch.io game, I made If You Get Nauseous Easily, You Shouldn't Play It Until I Fix the Camera. Hey, Future Erros here, it works! Just need to update the game, but may have introduced some bugs to the original project when trying to find a solution. Yeah, need to start backing up projects. So quickly breaking down both Tetris clones I made, starting with the latter C++ version, I regrettably never took a video of it functioning. I have an image, but honestly not too proud of that project, being that the updates to rotate or move the pieces were inconsistent. I believe the biggest issue was I used a code sample that only used one thread, and I was putting the thread to sleep multiple times. I also had no experience in Vulkan or Android and a month and a half to learn. Yeah, not the best, but let's move on to the easier to work with Jolgo version, where I used the rotating cube sample, so the threads were already set up correctly for me by someone far smarter than I. Overall, it works pretty well aside from the graphical bug of cubes drawing in front of each other and the occasional incorrect hitbox collision, as I hard-coded the rotation position since I made the entire thing in 12 hours and was up for something like 30 hours by the time I presented the project 6 hours later. Yeah, first semester of grad school was rough. I also made the mistake of taking 5 classes, 3 of which had grad projects, where 2 of the 3 had accompanying mid and final report papers. All were basically solo, as the one I had a team member, they let me do the mid and final report. Then they copied and pasted some code from Stack Overflow and gave it to me, as if to say, combine our code and make it work. If you don't know what it does, what makes you think I do? During this time, I also moved into an apartment, spent my weekends helping my parents move into their new house, and taught the lab for x86 assembly after not taking the class for 3 years. Fun stuff. I took 2 more semesters with less credits after that, however it ended up being more or less the same, but I think we get it right. Grad school is rough. Those are the most noteworthy things I've done in the past 4 years, and all of them besides the second and third Moon Jam occurred in the year and a half I was in grad school, which I decided to take a semester off being a little burnt out, and that just so happened to be the same semester the pandemic hit. So my inspiration for a real-time Pokemon game came from watching the anime. I wanted to recreate the combat from Ash and Brock's fight where Pikachu ran up Onix's body. Wait, that never happened in the anime. Somehow my headcanon made false memories for me, but you can do that in the game. To Ash and Blaine's fight where Charizard grabbed Magmar and Seismic tossed them into the volcano. The Cinnabar Island episode was probably my favorite, being I owned it on VHS and watched it religiously. The puzzles leading up to the fight with Blaine had me really excited to play the first generation of games because I felt like I already knew the answers to the puzzles. So you can probably imagine my disappointment when I finally played the Gen 1 remake Fire Red. However, when I played through Sun, I got a sense of nostalgia as the layout of Halui City reminded me of the several beachside cities shown in the anime, but much like the city, left me empty. My intentions for this project were to light a fire under Game Freak, as I thought if I, a solo developer with no professional experience, could show a respectable amount of progress towards a real-time combat Pokemon game, then Game Freak would no longer have an excuse. However, only time will tell how well I did, but what do you think? I know I didn't start this project like other game developers with monthly or bi-monthly devlogs, but I didn't want to cease and desist before I thought the project was ready to show off. I was also worried that if people got interested in the project, then I would feel like I was letting them down if I didn't work on it enough. And like mentioned previously in my background, I started this project in university, so it wasn't the only thing I was focused on. There are probably people thinking that I was stupid for trying to make an open world RPG as a solo developer without professional experience, or making devlogs to document progress and garner attention, and while they are correct, I don't regret it. If it wasn't for this project, I don't think I would have continued to learn game development, and after making the UI recreation video, I realized how many little things go overlooked, and that made me appreciate all the little things Game Freak adds. Ironically, it all began with Diamond and Pearl. By that time, I had already played through 2 generations, so I was starting to get burnt out on turn-based games. From the random crits to the slow battles because I only turned on fast text but didn't disable animations, to the same old mash A to win, but with different mons and stories. Though catching them all was always my kind of thing, since the amount of work needed to find people to play against and the hardware needed in those days was a lot for a kid living in a small town. For these reasons, I gravitated towards solely single-player games, and that's when I found The Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Oblivion was the game I was looking for. It showed what an open-world RPG on a console could be, and the naive kid I was, I thought, why doesn't Pokemon just come to a different console than Nintendo? Later, finding the answer to that question is the fact that Nintendo owns about half the franchise. Before that revelation, I also experienced Skyrim, and with just 5 years between games, seeing the quality of life improvements made for combat, even if it was at the cost of the story, reminded me of my lost hope of having a real-time Pokemon game, and how I could reward players for being mechanically good at the game instead of holding A to win. Since Skyrim came to the Switch, there really isn't an excuse anymore, and though Legends Arceus looks promising in its open world aspect, I have concerns that will be touched on in a later section. At the time of my lost hope a decade ago, I started thinking about what I could do to possibly remedy Pokemon from being 2D and turn-based. I had no game design and a little programming experience from an online class I took for Visual Basics that I failed miserably. Reading was harder then, being I had no patience and dyslexia, which the only thing that's changed is patience for reading lines multiple times. But the first thing I did is a mock-up UI heavily inspired by Skyrim with an over-the-shoulder view to pay homage to the old 2D Pokemon games. Later changed from the idea of individual bars that when full would disappear from the screen to a grouping in the bottom left corner to fit the UI look of the current generations. So why did I choose the Gen 4 remakes? Well, after 2.5 years of development, there started being a lot of discussion in the community about what the next games were going to be, especially after the just announced Sword and Shield. I, along with others, thought it was going to be the Gen 4 remakes, so I decided to work towards that, and though I wasn't completely happy with my work, the 25th Pokemon Day was fast approaching, so I felt it was the best time, if any, to show off the project, as if I waited, I would have had to pivot the art to look more like the trailer at the expense of a year and a half of work. Which, after recreating the UI from Sword and Shield, mimicking the art style and the landscape seemed like an impossible task, especially for a programmer, which you could probably tell by my slapped together assets. Legends Arceus, where do I begin? I've rewritten this section 4 times as more and more information came out, so hopefully this is the last. I was feeling super hopeful after seeing the trailers because we were finally getting an open world game, but I didn't want to get my hopes up in case I got burned. You can probably see where this is going. After learning that Legends Arceus wasn't going to be an open world game from Kotaku, I'll be honest, I was ready to cancel my pre-order, which you can probably see the irony pre-orders game, doesn't want to get burnt. Yes, quality life decisions. But I held off from canceling because the news came from Kotaku. So should I really take that at face value? And in the case that Kotaku didn't lie or clickbait, then maybe I should wait and give the game a fair assessment. You know, when has Game Freak ever let me down? Next, you're going to tell me the game is still turn-based, but with the opportunity to push the confirm button twice as much before the enemy's turn. Which I shouldn't need to say how I feel about that, but at least they're making an attempt to change combat, even if it's been 25 years. But hey, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? However, from the trailer, I can tell they're trying out beneficial things like what a few YouTubers thought was a low frame rate chingling, that I thought was a placeholder animation because the other characters in the scene were smooth, until I saw this video where a guy talks about how it's most likely a billboard asset. A billboard asset is simply put the furthest level of detail asset shown before the character model disappears from sight, where instead of being 3D, it's 2D. Now, while only 7 to 8 Pokemon have been shown at max in the trailer and the info we've been given, with the previous billboard knowledge, I'm going to speculate we might get 30 plus Pokemon on screen at once. And Game Freak is keeping it a secret, or they could be having performance issues, and the LODs are there to help get the game to a smooth 60 frames per second. So again, let's not get our hopes up. Last, where are the outlines? They play such a pivotal role in anime-style games, but I'm going to speculate on their absence. The first of the 3 points being they felt it didn't fit with the watercolor art style. Second depends on the outline method they used in Sword and Shield, which I think looks very nice, but I also have a hard time telling if it's inverted whole or post-process. The differences are inverted starts at a lower cost and a higher fidelity, but as more characters occupy the screen, it suffers from having to draw more polygons, which could lead to a lower frame rate. As for post-process, it has a higher starting cost, is more work to make it look nice, but it doesn't suffer from the polygon limit of the GPU. At first I wanted to say inverted whole because the outlines stay the same size as you move away from the other Pokemon, and when looking at Regidrago, the outline isn't consistent around the dragon's head. However, when seeing how it interacts with the beam that emits from Raidens, it screams post-process to me. So the exclusion of both methods could be they were unable to solve performance issues, or, my third point, if it is in fact an inverted whole and they tried to switch to a post-process for Legends Arceus. They might have suffered from the outlines eroding the visuals either through the amount of time they would have to put aside for one developer to increase the fidelity, or the outlines weren't scaling correctly so as they got further away the outlines grew in size, but I highly doubt the latter was the case. However, in the slight chance that is the case, excuse me for a second while I sell out. Here we have a post-process outliner I've been working on that started as the one provided from the post-processing in UE4 cell shading livestream back in January 2018, which had the problem of outlining everything in the scene and the outlines getting bigger as you moved away. From that, I moved to a combination of 2 others with some additions, and I will link to all previously used tutorials in the description. Now, that's not to say that mine is perfect, as there's still one glaring issue even after changing the outline from a popping in to a fading out effect, but it's getting closer. It all sparked from how to do an outline effect in an open world game that only affects certain characters and without a jarring pop-in effect. But enough of the selling out and the nerd talk. My hopes for the franchise, besides the obvious one, are ones that have been voiced time before or things I feel like they need more work. So let's start with voice acting. Pokemon's never had it, and the one mainline game that could have benefited the most was Gen 5. That, or either cut down on the redundant sentences, which might have been a translation issue, which I could go into details of how the first iteration of the game made me drop the series for 8 years, and how the second iteration is one of my favorites. Then again, the playthroughs were almost 8 years apart, and I'm a different person. But as an adult and a child, I enjoyed Gen 2. However, let's not derail. Next, multiplayer, in particular co-op storylines and expansion on raids. So with co-op, it would be nice to be able to adventure the world with your friends, whether that be a party of 4 or more in a private game instance, so much like a lobby system where if you see your friends are online, you could join their server. That way you could explore together or maybe have small cooperative dungeons where instead of battling Pokemon like raids, you could solve puzzles like Blaine's gym mentioned earlier. In the case of exploration, either you need to join their Discord voice chat, or it would be nice to have an in-game option, but I could see a good reason for not having it. I uh, I lived through the Modern Warfare lobby days, which I guess I have to clarify since the new Battle Royale. I'm talking about COD 4 and 5. God, I'm old. Next, raids. So with raids, they weren't bad, but they felt confined. Like it would have been nice to be able to walk through the dungeons, much like Final Fantasy 15, where if you went off the intended path, you could get items, but you'd be forced to fight more monsters than if you didn't. Additionally, being able to decide your character's age for diverging story paths and difficulties, where if you decide to play as an adult, not only is the story more complicated, but it's also harder. The story is complicated in the sense that you could fight evil organizations again and make it more of a gray story. The balance for getting a harder playthrough would be giving adults the ability to swim without Pokemon, which transitions us into our last 2 points. With adults getting the benefit of swimming, it would become particularly useful when starting the game from any town, leading back to a more non-linear style Pokemon game in a hope that with all towns being starter towns, they are bigger and feel more lived in. A good example of a lived in but small town is Balina from Sword and Shield. For the changelog, I updated small portions of it to read easier for the video, but most of it is still in simplistic language, which is a bunch of just I did this smile type sentences. And instead of reading the entirety of the changelog like I already did, I'm going to just show the changelog itself, where at any point you can pause the video and read the differences between versions. Then I'll highlight the most notable changes. 1.0, imagine the first version is the third person template because I didn't think far enough ahead to back it up. 1.0 to 1.1 added radial movement when locking on. 1.1 to 1.2 created animation blueprint custom events to handle variables instead of checking their values every tick. 1.2 to 1.3 added simple AI and rewrote HUD and animation functions. 1.3 to 1.4 added the ability for quadrupedal Pokemon to rotate to match plane normal. 1.4 to 1.5 removed cast 2s by adding interfaces. 1.5 to 1.6 added a spawner class, fixed AI movement not rotating to match plane normal, and started writing a vulnerability code for combat. 1.6 to 1.7 changed transition pivot point between walking and running animations, rewrote the outline shader to use stencils, and moved natureless and attack effectiveness into data tables. 1.7 to 1.8 started assembling the Sword and Shield pause menu and added controller support for menus. 1.8 to 1.9 separated code into functions for easy use, changed the locking on indicator to the outline color turning red, added the addition of switching between locked on enemies, fixed a few bugs, improved pause menu appeal and use, added to the enemy AI, and added environment assets. 1.9 added to the enemy AI and let them finally fight each other, use ultra dynamic sky for the day-night cycle, polished the pause menu for a fake leak, added the Mount Coronet and Distortion World terrain, along with other assets for the final 5-part fake leak. And note, everything previously listed are things I remember to document as I'm exceptionally bad at documentation. For example, while making this video, I showed my friend the project and remembered about the player's ability to switch between which Pokemon they are controlling. As seen here, the capsule for switching is a bit small, so I'm thinking of making it bigger to be easier when switching between Pokemon. The reason for this solution is pressing a button to cycle between your Pokemon would take the player out of combat in a negative button mashing minigame that might occur multiple times in one battle. But comment below your thoughts on this solution. I want to know if maybe there's a easier and more enjoyable way that I'm failing to think of. I also started updating a trail asset I bought. It used to pass the entire mesh data when turning on and off the effect. I was thinking of using the effect in terms of after images for quick attack and volt tackle. Saw someone say my work was good for a first year animation student. Thanks, I took a 3D modeling class where our final project was a 60-second animation. that won't be shown. I voice acted as Kermit.
Look, there's a firework
Please
outside.
no.
Oh, well.
Moving on.
Oh, again,
Let's
going
take a look
outside.
at the reference material I used to make the walking and running animations. So here are the animations created by Game Freak and then my animations. So I was trying to faithfully recreate the animations for more believability, and for the animations that had no references, I thought what would look cool while taking inspiration from the anime. But again, not being trained as an animator, I'm missing the tension buildup between keyframes to make them more impactful. For example, the Iron Tail attack is a front flip, so I wanted to show Pikachu's front legs coming off the ground as if to say it's leaping, and then to flip over its body like a Superman flip. I underestimate how much free time some people have. Yeah, 4 years. If it was so easy, you would have done it by now, huh? I saw several comments talking about how I will ultimately abandon this project, so I guess this is the best time, if any, to say this. The entirety of this project is written in blueprints. And on top of that, I didn't build it in a way that supports multiplayer. So I'm going to take a hiatus to finally learn Unreal C++ instead of relying on my standard C++ knowledge. Which this might be a good enough time, if any, to show the application I made for Moonjam. This application assists in the code reviewing process and automatically builds Godot, Unity, and Unreal projects on their respective command lines. For projects that don't have command line building, I was going to work on an image processing bot that goes through the menus and presses the build button so that I don't have to. However, that is very far into the future. So you might have noticed the higher thread count performs worse. That has to do with context switching, which is an OS level concept, but what do I know? I just learned JavaScript over the weekend. So that you have a little more info, here's the 6th thread run without OBS running. All runs are cold cache as I'm restarting the program so that the run counter can be 1 each run. I'll also try to do a more in-depth video about the program in the future. So let me explain why I use stamina points outside of combat. It's so that you don't gain an unfair advantage against your opponent, which could be an AI or another player. However, I keep track of when you are and aren't in battle, so I could easily reduce the amount used based on that. I just don't want to make running free, because if you sneak attack an opponent that is a higher level than you, there's a high chance you're going to win. I also wanted to encourage switching to the trainer that hasn't been implemented yet, but they will have infinite stamina. My intentions with the new combat system is I didn't want to confuse people by using PowerPoint since the combat systems play differently, but I can also change it back if people still think that's the wrong choice. For example, I want it to function where a move like Earthquake might not be able to be used 10 times when it's first learned, but will depend on the amount of stamina, fitness factor, and stamina regen your Pokemon has. The amount of stamina would be based on level. The stamina regen, I don't know if it would be best to create another stat or to base it on speed. Honestly, unsure, because this could easily end up contributing poorly to the player experience. For the fitness factor, I was going to base it off how much exercise and how well your Pokemon are eating. So, for example, based on how far your Pokemon is from their generated optimal weight, it would cost more or less stamina per move, and regen would be slower or faster. If your Pokemon were 10% within their optimal weight, then there'd be no change in stamina cost or regen. If 5% actions would cost less and have faster regen, if 15% it would be the opposite. Then compounding this with the quality of food you give them, and you'll have super powerful Pokemon. But while this would allow for a tangible way to build a bond with your Pokemon, as a game mechanic, I think most people will hate it. Lastly, I also added cast times to certain moves in which you won't be able to move for its duration, and this is to balance the stronger moves from wanting to be spammed and give opponents the opportunity to react and possibly turn the tables. TLDR, first, my leak isn't legitimate because the stats aren't in a box. What? You mean like there isn't a background image that the stat bars fit into? Cause it's definitely in a box. Second, that the stats take up too much of the screen real estate and don't disappear. I'll give you the not disappearing. Why did they choose a Pikachu
Maybe the
model
Pikachu is
instead
just
of
the
the why would you
options you move
control
around
Pikachu
faster
in
in
a
the
Sinnoh
beta?
remake? So, more than Pikachu just being the mascot of the franchise, Pikachu posed a unique technical problem, which is where they are bipedal while walking and quadrupedal while running. So I worked on a general solution that should cover every other land-based Pokemon. However, I haven't animated any other Pokemon, so I'm unsure if it really works. If I saw a video of someone claiming this could be real, I'll seriously throw up. HDV, Versify, and Raffle Rowlet entered the chat. I think they're all smart enough to understand this graphic is so cheap even for a fan-made project. Oh, did someone say Ruffled Rowlet?
So what is it? I don't even know. Okay, so options. What is it? Icon progress. Oh, yo, that's cool. That's really cool. If that's true.
Wild Area looks a billion times better than this. That was unpolished, whereas this just looks amateur, like something a fan put together in Unity to demonstrate how the Distortion World might look in 3D. I did put this together in a week and a half, but as to how the Distortion World would look like, I think I got pretty close to the reference material. Thank you to everyone who thought my work was good enough to say that I should be hired. It means a lot. But sadly, it's more complicated than that. I don't know what the required Japanese proficiency is to work at Game Freak, but being their website doesn't have an English section, I'm going to assume N2 or N1, and I think I could barely pass N4. So on top of the fact I don't meet the required proficiency level, I would also have to be relocated, and then they would have to wait about a year for me to get to the required proficiency. From a business perspective, I'm not skilled enough to spend that kind of money. Which hurts, but I understand. I spent 4 years making this game and trying to learn Japanese at the same time, but sometimes that's how life is. Just because you want something so bad you sacrifice friendships and hours of the day doesn't mean you're going to be rewarded the amount you think you deserve, if at all. So I guess I'll end it here by saying Game Freak, Pokemon Company, or Nintendo, whoever it may pertain, if you want to hit me with a cease and desist, the comment section below works. しかし、出る前に、田尻先生とゲームフリックが大好きなフランチャイズを作ってくれてありがとうございました。I also want to thank Ash for the one sound effect used in the fake leaks, and everyone who watches this. Right before I go, I want to thank you again for even clicking on this video and making it this far. It took 9 months, but it's finally finished. Honestly, I thought it was going to take far less time, but between my indecisiveness for video structure, hating my own voice, and my fear of failure, I was frozen. But the more time that goes by, the less impressive what I created becomes. So before this becomes the game I failed to make after 5 years, it's better to push aside that sense of failure and look at it with a different lens. This is the start of my game development career. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu.